Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Sydney Ideas, and a special edition of Sydney Ideas. We're also recording this for the Solutionists podcast. I'm Mark Scott, I'm Vice-Chancellor of the University of Sydney, and at the outset I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Sydney Ideas is the University of Sydney's flagship public talks program. And tonight we're delighted to invite one of our own to come and speak with us about his new and exciting book. Alex Lefebvre is a professor and director of the new Bachelor of Politics, Philosophy and Economics program here at the University of Sydney. This is a new degree that we're offering next year. We are thrilled at the level of interest and engagement from prospective students. And Lisa Atkins, the Dean of Arts and Social Sciences, and I were thinking about re-enrolling ourselves and doing this exciting new degree, which we know is going to be very engaging for our students. And Alex is leading this program for us. But in his academic work, he has focused on a big idea for the last decade, and that is that political ideas and political institutions can and do inspire rich and rewarding ways of life. And he's reflected on this in his new book, Liberalism as a Way of Life. And tonight he's going to unpack those key ideas for us. And his 10-second pitch spelled out in the book that if you live in a country like Australia and you're not religious, more likely than not you're not religious, then you're probably liberal deep down. And that liberal values such as fairness, freedom, tolerance and irony will be at the heart of your worldview, the way you see the world, the way you live your life, generally the person who you are. But fascinatingly, I think in Alex's book, this philosophy, this worldview is something that we've probably never looked at and articulated in a way that we understand has great meaning for us. So can liberalism and thinking about liberalism be the basis for a meaningful way of life and a fun way of life? Alex is going to tell us how. Will you welcome Alex? And then after we hear from Alex, an opportunity for your questions. We're going to have Slido up so you can present questions and Alex will give us all our answers. Alex, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Mark, very much for the warm and generous introduction. Thank you to the production team. Andy, I know there you are. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for coming. So the book has been out now, Liberalism as a Way of Life, for 3-4 months, but I've always regarded this as sort of the launch event, so I'm delighted to be here. And what I've tried to do, as Mark said in his remarks, I've tried to make liberalism personally relevant to us, to you and to me. And so where I'd like to start describing the book is with a very specific experience that got my thinking about the book going. So from my voice, you can probably tell I'm not from around these parts. I'm Canadian, and I moved here in 2010. Now, for the first several years, I had taken trips back to Canada with my family, my family to spend Christmas. And one year we decided enough's enough. The plane tickets are too much. We're going to stay put. And 2016, we celebrated Christmas here for a welcome novelty, Christmas in full summer, which for Canadians just blew our minds. So we did the ordinary things on that morning, long breakfast, opened some gifts, and then we went down to our local beach, which is Coogee, to be greeted by this scene. It was nuts. It was so nuts that it made the New York Times as a reported story for how much trash it produced. And my first thought, so we went there, we had a good time, don't get me wrong. And so we went there, and the first thought that crossed my mind was that, this is Christmas Day, was that Sydney is the most godless city I've ever seen. My second thought was, must be how medieval people imagined the fun parts of hell. It was good times. And so this got me thinking, like, who are we? What kind of people are we? This is not at our best, it's not at our worst, but it's somehow indicative or representative. Who are we that Christmas Day could be spent in such a fashion? And that got me thinking to the more basic question is, where do we in liberal democracies, in by and large secular liberal democracies, where do we get our values from? So, if I can ask a quick indicative question, who here is not religious? Okay, my wife was worried, what if no one puts up their hand? And I said, this is a university in Newtown. Are you kidding me? So my question to you, very directly, very personally, I know some of you, I don't know all of you, but is where do you get your top line values, but not just that. The word I like to use, and it's a bit cringe, my daughter would say, but where do you get your vibe from? What kind of moral sensibility, aesthetic values constitute who you are deep down? And my pitch to you is that you hand-putter-uppers are most likely liberal in a very deep way. And we're going to come revisit that possibility at the end, and I'll take who thinks they're liberal deep down. Okay, I'm going to convert you one soul at a time. That's the plan. So the book makes three big claims. The first claim is descriptive, and I'll just read it out. So the descriptive claim of the book is that a great many people living in Western democratic countries, Australia, Canada, United States, etc., are liberals, this is my term, all the way down, by which I mean that they draw their values and vibe and their sense of what is good, right, normal, outrageous, wrong, funny, worthwhile, and much more from liberalism. And to be clear, I'm not messing around here. Here's the last line of the book. Liberalism is the source of my soul, I confess. The wager of this book is that the same is probably true of you. I'll come back to that. Liberalism in action. The next claim that I make is, the first is descriptive, and I'm going to spend some time doing that. The next one is normative, which is I want to say that a way of life inspired by liberalism can be not just happy and fun, which I think it is, but worthy of happiness and fun, that it is a good way of life. Now, to be very clear, I don't claim that it's the best of all possible ways of life. I don't know how that claim could ever be made. I'm a value pluralist, so I don't know how we could rank like a Confucian way of life is there, Christian over here, liberal down here. That doesn't make sense to me. But what I want to say is that a liberal way of life is just as worthy, just as deep, just as serious, and just as joyful as any other. And the third claim, I'm not going to talk about this, but it's in the book, so I just mention it because it's kind of the third half of the book, which is a practical claim. In that what I try to do, I'm only half kidding when I say this is a book of self-help, because I'm trying to get liberals to become their best liberal self. And so I outline a set of practical exercises, what I call spiritual exercises, that you and I and any other wannabe liberal can undertake whenever they so choose. So 3 claims, descriptive, normative, and practical, and that makes up the package of the book. So here's a little roadmap of what I want to do before we take questions. I want to first start briefly with a history of liberalism as it's conceptually and philosophically pertinent to where we find ourselves today, because it's a very interesting story. Next, I want to offer a definition of liberalism, because get 5 liberals in a room and you'll get 10 definitions, so we need to know what we're talking about. After that, I want to give some more thickness to this with some examples of how you and I might actually be robustly, deeply, in our bones liberals because we marinate in this culture of ours. And then I want to turn the tables on us so we don't get all too self-satisfied and talk about how, well, we're kind of just joke liberals at the end of the day. We're pretend liberals in a pretend liberal world. And last, to end on a high note, I'm going to talk about the goods and goodness of a liberal way of life. So let's begin at the beginning with the history of liberalism. And if I could recommend, in addition to mine, one fine book on liberalism, it would be this one, written by a historian based in New York, Helena Rosenblatt. And this came out 2018 from also Princeton University Press. And what Rosenblatt does in this is she tries to trace out where this idea of liberalism came from. And what's so interesting about liberalism is that it's at once a very new thing and at once a very old thing. It's a very new thing because in terms of political ideologies, it's only 200 years old. People only started calling themselves liberals in 1806-ish in response and resistance to Napoleon. And then Napoleon, big jerk like he was, took the claim for himself and called himself a liberal, and then it spread all throughout Europe. But the point is in terms of ideologies, it's the new kid on the block. It's very, very new by the standards of intellectual history. I'll park that for a second. But the word liberal itself is a very old word with roots in Latin. And what Rosenblatt does in her text is she tries to trace out this word history of what the word means. And the root of the word means refers to 2 qualities. Being liberal in the ancient world meant that you had 2 qualities or capacities. On the one hand, you were a free individual, meaning that we very much associate now with liberalism, but on the other hand, just as fundamentally, we are also a generous individual. And we preserve that word, that meaning, that double meaning of the word liberal in our current understanding of it, right? Free and generous. So here's a not very flattering picture of J.S. Mill, not a looker, but a deep thinker. And he came, so this is from the OED, Oxford English Dictionary, excuse me. And liberal means free in giving, generous, benevolent, magnanimous. So this is a common sense meaning for us. Like if I ask for a liberal serving of soup, I'm not asking for a politically progressive soup, right? I'm asking for a big old portion of soup. So we preserve that idea of free and generous. Now, what happens with the history of liberalism is just very interesting. I can only briefly touch upon it. But basically, every version of civilization in Western history reinvents the term, putting its own transforming it through its own moral paradigm. So in the ancient world, being liberal meant being generous with one's life, with one's talents, with one's money, to something bigger and broader than yourself, whether that's the republic, the empire. In Christianity, as you might expect, the word gets reinvented and is tied to the virtue of charity and how we relate to and honor the poor. So the word liberal is actually used about a dozen times in the King James Bible. Interesting. And last, it had a renaissance in the early modern world, especially the American Republic, as meaning generous and contributing to the public good. Now, what happens here is where the story gets relevant and contemporary and very, very interesting. So liberalism is born in the 19th century, and the early thinkers who called themselves liberal, and there are so many great ones. There's Tocqueville, there's Mill, there's Benjamin Constant, there's George Eliot, there is Germaine de Stael, you name it. There's just this pantheon of amazing thinkers. And whatever their differences, I believe, and I'm not being idiosyncratic here, but they're animated by one big question. And that question is how can modern subjects, this is what the 19th century liberals were all freaked out about and asking, how can modern subjects remain free and generous, which is to say remain liberal, in the face of powerful new social forces? That is the big modern question that the liberals asked. And when you wonder what forces are we talking about, like what threatened us not to be free and generous, liberals pointed to two things, very interestingly. On the one hand, they pointed to capitalism, and capitalist tendency to make us nasty little consumerist subjects wanting at the end of the day only a scotch and something else to kind of tame their materialistic hearts. And that's where capitalism would land us in terms of who we're going to be. But early liberals were also terrified of democracy. They feared very much the popular power of the people, but they also feared the mediocrity of the people. That a world in which the common man set the standards of taste, that would not be a world in which they wanted to live in. And so what early liberals did is established all sorts of countermeasures to block, prevent, shape, manage democracy. So just close your eyes and think of the main liberal institutions that you might know. Individual rights, division of power, judicial neutrality. All of that stuff is explicitly counter-majoritarian and was meant to block or shape democracy in important ways. And so whereas today we think liberal democracy, one big happy basket of stuff, right? The two go together like peaches and cream. That is a 200-year negotiation that had to be achieved. At first, it was not like that. But what I really want to point out, so we can go into field questions, it's a very deep topic, but what I really want to point out is that liberalism in its first formulation was not just a political doctrine, but an ethical one. And that for me is crucial because I want to try to recover that ethical impulse. Now the interesting question then becomes, and I'm going to wrap up the historical bit right now, is what the hell happened to liberalism? Why did it become so retrenched, such an anemic version of itself that we no longer regard its ethical oomph, that we no longer see it as having to do with fundamental questions about how to live well, but instead think about it very narrowly in terms of rights and constitutions and politics and stuff? And so different authors point to different reasons as to why liberalism pared itself right back. Rosenblatt herself points to a moment when the discourse of classical liberalism was invented by early 20th century thinkers who really favored market freedoms. So classical liberals, right, didn't call themselves classical liberals. That wouldn't make sense. Hey, I'm a classical liberal. Like, they didn't do that. Instead, that term was invented retrospectively to counteract certain socialistic tendencies, certain progressive tendencies that a whole bunch of free market types, von Mises, Friedman, Hayek, and others, all feared. And so they reclaimed a version of that. But in that, you lost a certain kind of maximal ethical vision. Another crucial moment when liberalism winnows itself down is the Cold War. And Cold War liberals were, very understandably, scared of all forms of collectivism. Nazism, though defeated, but especially the USSR. And what they really wanted to recast liberalism as was a protection, a shield from state power that might impose itself on us. So here's another moment when liberalism dialed itself back for very understandable reasons. Last bit of history. My own text focuses on contemporary political philosophy. And this is the leading school in my little neck of the woods of political philosophy. And the idea is that we see liberalism, and I think this is an idea that we would all instantly recognize. The point of liberalism is to provide societies that are inclusive and fair to all of its citizens. And so when I confront a difficult idea, my first move is to draw it. So here in my inimitable style is how I think we understand liberalism today, just kind of pre-reflexively. Like, this is just what we think. So we think that we have this liberal, I'm calling it a political conception, but just call it like a liberal framework. And in that, it harbors, or it manages to make an inclusive world for all of these different positions. So this is like a walks into a bar joke, but you have a Christian, a Buddhist, a Muslim, a Kantian, a utilitarian, and they need the kinds of structures that will not just keep them from tearing each other apart, but will allow them to robustly affirm them for similar and shared sets of moral reasons, such that we can all be together in civic harmony and friendship. That's the dream, and that's, I think, a very recognizable vision. And all that's cool, and I admire that, and that's important. But again, we lose sight of the idea that liberalism might be something thick, something have to do with us deep down, because all of these other people have something else that everyone who put up their hands don't. I'm not a Christian. I'd love to be. I'd love to be a Buddhist. I don't have those resources in my back pocket. And so what this picture blocks us from being able to see is how liberalism might be a very, very deep thing indeed. So that's how liberals tend to see liberalism. But here's where my story gets a little bit controversial in a fun way for me, because I'm engaging with interlocutors that I'd never expected to. So people who like liberalism tend to think about it as a neutral kind of thing, a political kind of thing. But you know who doesn't? You know who sees liberalism for the thick, ethical thing that it is? The haters of conservatism, the critics of conservatism, the Catholics, the conservatives, the American far right. They see, I think, liberalism for what it truly is today. And while they pass a judgment on it that I don't agree with, I think they are right about it in terms of scope. So this is Patrick Deneen, author might be known to you, wrote a hit book called Why Liberalism Failed. Not a very good book, but it's okay, it makes a point. And Obama retweeted it in 2018, and it got a whole life of its own. And his claim is that liberalism has become so much more than a political thing. So to quote, liberalism is not merely, as is often portrayed, a narrowly political project of constitutional government and juridical defense of rights. Rather, it seeks to transform all of human life and the world. Oof. It is the blob, if you like. Rum, rum, rum. Another important thinker, Adrian Vermeule, the top Trump jurist right now. He's going to review my book, something I'm not looking forward to. And he wrote, the main fact about our lived political order in 2024 is that the public sphere is dominated by a very particular comprehensive or perfectionist version of liberalism, which is aggressively sacramental and liturgical. That guy gets it. He's wrong about it. He's wrong that it's worthless or that it's noxious or that it's politically destructive, but I think in terms of scale, he gets it. And so this is where I find myself agreeing with people who make odd bedfellows about a certain key aspect about liberalism. Make sense? All right. Now, so that's a little bit about the history of liberalism and where we are today. Let me try to define liberalism, get a bit of kind of substance around this word, and then we can go from there to see how it might inform us in a very profound way. So there's a great many liberals, but the unacknowledged heavyweight champion of the world, as it were, is the great political philosopher of the 20th century, John Rawls. And John Rawls is the major liberal, and he is where I draw my conception of liberalism from. It's very important, though, why Rawls is so important to me. It's not because he's a VIP, a very important philosopher. It's not like that. It's not argument from authority. It's rather how Rawls proceeds that I find so compelling. Rawls doesn't start, John Rawls here, great philosopher, Harvard, spent his whole career there. His fundamental book is A Theory of Justice, 1971, that became a sort of Bible to political philosophy in the Anglophone world. So Rawls begins his book not by head-on defining liberalism, but he kind of looks around his society. And he's like, when I look at all the major public documents and practices and artifacts of my world, what like basic moral stuff does it enshrine? What's its core moral commitment? So he looks at the political speeches, at the constitutions, judicial decisions, all that stuff. And he searches and searches and sifts. And he's trying to find out that basic moral proposition that would sum up where all this stuff comes from. And at some point, he hits bedrock. And his bedrock is this. It's that he thinks that we think society is a fair system of cooperation from one generation to the next. That is what he believes at heart animates at least the public face and the publicly avowed commitments of Western liberal democracies. Now, Australia has a beautiful, earthy, two-word version of this that I wish we could bottle and export. What is it? Did someone say sausage? I admire that. That's not where we're going. It's a fair go, of course. And so my definition of liberalism, so he thinks that liberalism is a liberal society is a fair system of cooperation from one generation to the next. And so my definition of liberalism is a bit more expansive, but it preserves that. It's the social, political, moral, and psychological doctrine that grows out of a conception of society as a fair system of cooperation, specifies what it means, and tries to make it real. And the book is really sinks or swims on this claim, because my claim is not that I'm telling you this. My claim is that you already think it, or you already hope it to be true. And liberalism has its hooks in you in a very deep way. And that's what Rawls does. He presumes that his readers already have widely imbibed this idea that society is a fair system of cooperation. And then he creates this magnificent, complicated political philosophy to flesh out what that might mean for our countries and to elaborate what it might mean for its citizens and how to become a more liberal person. Now, here's a very important distinction between what Rawls is doing, who wrote 40 years ago, and what I'm doing, who I have the benefit of 40 years of cultural development to be able to say this. So Rawls finds or locates liberal values and sensibilities in what he calls, let's just call it political stuff, but he locates it in the public or political culture of liberal democracies, places like constitutions, rights, political speeches, judicial decisions, etc. That's the mothership of liberalism. That's where we find that stuff. I, on the other hand, have think that has gone viral into the bloodstream of Western liberal democratic culture, at least the mainstream of it. And so Lefebvre and his weird bedfellows, these conservative critics, all right, find liberal values and sensibilities in the background culture of liberal democracy. And by background culture, I mean everything. I mean places like TV, movies, social media, music, parenting, pornography, dating, friendship, the workplace, and much, much more. Liberalism won the moment it took over Netflix. That's my deepest belief, and that's where I believe we imbibe it most, not through political encounters, but through this other kinds of stuff, through Selena here. Now, I want to, oops, no, backwards. So now I want to give a bit more kind of evidence as to what on earth I'm talking about. So you're liberal deep down, that just sounds so abstract. And I want to try to give it a bit more flesh, a bit more experiential meaning, so you're like, oh yeah, I can kind of see what he's talking about. So I want to give you a couple of examples. My book is, if I flatter myself, the book is just crammed with examples, because I really do need to elicit the sense of readers that, hey, the mainstream culture we inhabit is liberal in this deep way. So I want to give you a couple of what I think is more kind of compelling examples, and we can go from there. And so my favorite topic, the quickest way I can do this, is also a very fun topic, especially for Australians, which is the history of swearing. Bear with me for a minute. There is this great book published about 10 years ago by a linguist named Melissa Moore, and the title is Genius. Holy shit, a brief history of swearing. The title is genius because with those two words, Moore encapsulates the history of swearing within Western civilization over 3,000 years. And what's so interesting about tracing out our swear words is that we can quickly find out the stuff that we find is morally sacrosanct, that we find is morally sacred, because you just flip it. It's the classic move of figuring out what the normal is by looking at the pathological. So you trace out the words we can't say, and we quickly figure out what are our real moral commitments. So in some eras of Western civilization, it's the holy words that are ascendant. Those are the really taboo words that we have never ought to say, at least not with great seriousness and graveness. So, for example, Judaic culture, the Middle Ages, in that case, calling on God, oath, Jesus, damn, Christ, those kinds of words that I can say now without anyone moving at all, everyone's cool. And those words were not just kind of like risque, they were dangerous because they called upon God in a witnessing, binding kind of sense, and badly, falsely, or ignominiously used could be really bad news. So those are the holy words. On the other hand, other moments of civilization, it's the shit words that are not good. The assholes, the fucks, the etc., the C-U-N-T, which I know you Australians use like over breakfast, but I can't. But for example, Rome. What was anyone? I know this isn't a class, but does anyone know in Rome what the main swear word was? If you want to get into a fight with a chesty, hairy, bristly Roman, what do you say to that Roman? And you're like in a fight in a minute. You impugn that Roman for sexual passivity. You call him words like getting fucked, words like being a sissy or a bottom, any of those words. Why are those words so terrible for Rome? Because above all, what Rome valued was the virile, active, penetrating citizen, and those kinds of words were missile attacks on that. Okay. So that's a fun little topic, history of swear words. Now, I've been swearing like a sailor here up on stage. No one cares. And so we might think, oh, we're so cool now. We're so post-swear words. We are absolutely not post-swear words. It's just our swear words have shifted categories. If I were to say certain words up here, nobody say them. If I were to say certain words up here, I would get reported to my boss, who actually happens to be there, and fired within the evening. And what are those words, of course? They're slurs. They are all kinds of slurs, racial slurs, sexual slurs, disability slurs, even, I'll risk getting fired, even a relatively tame term from my youth, like calling someone a spaz, would be absolutely not okay anymore. That is not okay speech. And why are slurs our swear words? Because we are liberal. Because what slurs do is they attack at its root the fundamental moral commitment of liberals, which is to ensure a society in which each of its members can flourish, and not just that, in which each of its members have acquired a robust sense of self-respect. What slurs do is try to teach people to hate themselves from the inside. And so that we shy away from slurs. That's not just that I wouldn't say them in public, I wouldn't dream of saying them in private. That shows a liberal sensibility and how deep down it runs. Does that make sense? So what I try to do in the book is multiply. I just that's one, and then I got others. Oh, okay, I have some slides, it's fine. Slides. So then I talk about the state of contemporary comedy. And, I mean, these are just absolutely paradigmatic comedy. Who's here has seen Nanette? Everybody's seen Nanette. So these are all, comedy has now become horizontal. It's about poking fun at ourselves. It's about sliding in and out of our identity. It's not about punching down or ridiculing our inferiors as it was only 70 years ago. New kind of comedy, new kind of sensibility. I then look at what meaning and purpose might look like for liberals. And I just take an artifact to explore, but pick your own if you prefer them. So The Good Place is a good example. Good Place is so interesting, I'm not going to talk about this, but because not one metaphysical question is asked in The Good Place. No one once wonders, is there a God? Not once, but they're in the afterlife. Like, what's going on? And that's a very liberal sensibility. Next, I look at porn. I'm worried that these are the pages I will be memorialized for. But if you go to Pornhub, not now, and you go to most popular videos, and you sort by world or United States or Australia, they're all the same. It doesn't matter. All the popular videos today are based around toying with the idea of consent. Why? Because consent is the #1 criterion for okay sex nowadays. Sex is okay if it's consented to. If it's not, it's not. But nothing about the acts themselves is intrinsically good or bad anymore. It's all about consent of the subject. So naturally, porn, which seeks out taboos and wants to violate and make us kind of excited, where is porn going to migrate now? Directly to not challenging directly the idea of consent, because this is still like a mainstream website, but all about like persuading, tricking, bribing, cajoling somehow an unwilling sexual partner to have sex with you. And it's almost always loser dudes who are getting laid from this, which is kind of an incel thing, which is terrible. But such is the market. So what I'm trying to say is that through all of these different sites of culture, I'm trying to suggest how this thing called liberalism may be pretty deep, may be pretty diffuse in the bloodstream of our culture. All right, next topic. I'm going to wrap up soonish. And here I want to ask a question. So I've been talking a big game about how liberalism is everywhere. Now, it would be very reasonable for you or for any protester out there to say, Alex, are you high? Have you looked at the world today? Does it look like a fair system of cooperation? Does anyone actually really believe that? And more kind of, my tendency is to more agree with that indictment rather than disagree with it, that we are not, of course, living either as individuals or as citizens or as collectives in what would be described as a liberal, fair, generous way. And so here I turn to, I go to a part of the book that I really like, and I draw on a theorist, on a philosopher that no one associates with liberalism, but I think is very apposite in this case. So Søren Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard is so very interesting for me. So Kierkegaard is a Danish theologian, 19th century, and he's also one of the great social critics of his time, as great as Nietzsche was, as great as Marx was. And Kierkegaard really is just an observer of his life. So he lives in Copenhagen, and he looks around and he sees that everyone in Denmark, everyone in Copenhagen claims to be a good Christian. There's a Lutheran church on every corner. People are going to service, they're crossing themselves, high-fiving, saying that they all follow the good life of Christ. But he looks at those same people who are so certain of their morality, and he looks at them a little closer, and he just says, bullshit. What these people want in their authentic desires is not the conscious unworldliness of Christ. What they really want is social respectability, moderate pleasures, a roast on Saturday, and a mistress on Sunday. That is their conception of the good life. What they really are, they're not Christians, they're bourgeois Philistines. They're just kind of us in some recognizable way. And what Kierkegaard says, he coins this very devastating word to describe his world and the hypocrites within it. And he lumps himself in with them. And that word is this one. He calls the world that results from this kind of play acting at Christianity, he calls Christendom. And that word in Danish is so powerful. I don't speak Danish, forgive me, but Christenhed is because it literally means Christian-ish, Christianness. And what he uses that word to identify is the world that emerges from people play acting at their most fundamental moral commitments. And Kierkegaard's criticism of his people is very, very important. You look at other great social critics of the time, and like Nietzsche and Marx, they're indicting the same culture. They all think it sucks, that it's unworthy in some important way. But those critics are looking for something else to get to. Marx wants some future communist society. Nietzsche wants to reach back to the Greeks or something. Kierkegaard's like, no, we're good. We have the right values. The problem is that none of us commit to them such that we live in this world. And so he's not trying to convince the atheist or the Muslim to be Christian. He's trying to convince the Christian to be Christian. And so you might see where I'm going with this. If Kierkegaard said that we lived in a world called Christendom, I believe very strongly that we live in a world called liberaldom, namely the world that results from our play acting at our deepest moral commitments. I don't think that we live in Christendom anymore. I don't think we have those public sacramental commitments that Christianity does, but I definitely think that we live in the same world where virtues and values are publicly affirmed, and yet they are not lived up to either at a collective or an individual level. So very last topic is what then? Are we just jokes? Are we just these sham moralities that are pretending to be something else? And what I'm trying to urge in my book, just like Kierkegaard did, he's trying to get the Christian to be Christian. I'm trying to get the liberal to be liberal. And so what I do is I have a very clickbaity title to this chapter. It had to be 17, because it has to be a prime number, and it has to be, etc. Anyway, so 17, interpolate or remove as much as you like for additional reasons. But what I try to do in the book is identify reasons why you and I would want to be liberal deep down. So at root, I think that liberalism is animated by three main moral commitments. One to individual freedom, one to fairness, and one to reciprocity. Taken together, freedom, fairness, reciprocity, I think makes up the liberal package of values. Now, I have to ask then, why would we want to live up to those values? Because it is super clear why deviating from those values is really advantageous all the time. Like, I want to pay less taxes. That's awesome. I want to send my kid to private school, even though that lavishes her with unfair advantages from one generation to the next. There are so many immediate and obvious rewards from deviating from my liberal commitments that I have to try to sell me and you on why on earth you would want to be liberal. And so what I try to come up with, I'm trying to give you really cash value reasons as to why you'd want to commit, and I give you 17. Voila! All at once. Now, I'm sure someone's going to ask about this slide later, so I can walk it back, but let me just overwhelm you with the goodness of how you already all live if you just did it a little better. 1, impartiality. 2, autonomy. 3, anti-snobbery. 4, playfulness. 5, stalwartness. 6, a feeling of being at home in society. 7, gratitude. 8, self-coherence. 9, avoidance of hypocrisy. 10, yeah, no, that one. 10, humility. 11, unity of the self. 12, gracefulness. 13, delight in others. 14, tolerance. 15, civility. 16, cheer. And 17, yeah, that's right, redemption. Yeah, that's right. That is the only response. But none of us do this, right? Like, okay, we'll come back. I have to be very clear here that no single one of these qualities, I call them existential perks, these lived benefits of being liberal. No one of these virtues is distinctively liberal. And I think a whole bunch of other conceptions of the good life could definitely claim a bunch of these. What I think, though, is taken as a package, if you put these 17 or 15 or 19, I don't care, just figure out what you think is core. If you put them together, I think that that is a distinctively liberal package of where we find ourselves today. And I'm trying to demonstrate the awesomeness of it. And the costs of deviating from it. So you may get a little bit more money if you chisel on your taxes, but redemption, you'll miss it. I've heard. I mean, what do I know? So very last point. What I'm trying to do in this book at the end is reanimate perhaps the opening question of political philosophy. So political philosophy was born, let's say, in Plato's Republic, the first great, at least preserved text of political philosophy. And at root of Plato's Republic is a very old question, but a very new question that will never, ever go away. And it's that one. Why is it good to be just? That's the basic question of Plato's Republic. And if you've read the text, you know that there are some bad hombres who come in and really question why that would be good. So there's this beast of a man, Thrasymachus, who busts onto the scene. And he's like, dude, you don't want to be just. You want the appearance of justice. You want to seem just to other people so that you get all the rewards, all the perks of justice. But the life of the tyrant is the best life of all. Think about it. Money, power, women, it's awesome. And what Socrates has to respond to him, he has to defend a notion of the good life that is intrinsically desirable, that it is the best of all possible life, not just for the fruits that it gives, but for its quality. And so if Plato's question is this one, why is it good to be just? Mine is just a slightly modified version. Why is it good for a liberal to really commit to a liberal way of life? And the answer, I hope it comes across in the book, and I'm very happy for your questions, is because if we don't commit, and if you and I we remain pretend liberals, then the 17 goods of a liberal way of life will elude us, and that is very sad. Thank you.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for that. Chairs are landing. We're also going to put up on the screen a Slido link. So if you have questions for Alex, send them on through. I will give Alex some just easy questions to get his eye in, and then the tough and demanding questions will come from the audience here. A masterclass for us this evening, Alex, and we'll just have a few questions here before people stampede the book table at the back to buy a copy of your book, and already some questions have come through as well. I suppose my first question is, it strikes me that you're an unlikely evangelist for liberalism, you know. And I suppose my question is, do you feel that liberalism needs evangelists? And what does it really matter that we are liberal to the core and we just didn't know it until we turned up tonight?
Ooh, that was your softball question? Okay, all right. Let me start with an uncontroversial claim. Liberals suck at defending themselves. That is something I deeply feel right now, that in the current fight for whatever political direction of the world, liberals are on the back foot and not doing well. And the reason why, I think, is because so many liberals only talk, the people who are committed liberals talk like institutionalists all the time, which is really important. They defend individual rights, division of power, non-corruption, all that stuff. And that stuff is vital. But their competitors their rivals, their populists, their authoritarians, they're coming at them with very, very deep alternatives, saying that we promise you a certain meaning to your life, and we're going to renew that. And I think liberalism has to, if not directly fight fire with fire, then acknowledge that that is the attack and try to mobilize a response in relation to it. And so, look, U.S. presidential election is coming along. And so what are the stakes? I mean, I don't know. I'm not someone that thinks that the world will collapse if Trump is elected. I'm not voting. I don't, first of all, I don't vote. Second of all, in America. But so I think that what's at stake for liberalism is the title of this talk. Liberalism may be the source of your soul. So if you don't want the default morality of our time to go away, then maybe you want to pay attention to the fate of liberalism. That's a bit my preachy answer, but that's what I would say.
And so you've really articulated the extraordinary kind of deep and abiding virtues of liberalism. But in your book you also say that actually that word liberalism is quite triggering in different circumstances and in a different political context. In the US and in France, it means quite different things. Yes. If you're a marketer, does liberalism have a brand problem? And would it be an easier conversation if you weren't trying to explain what liberalism was, but it was called something else?
So I think that's a good question. I hadn't thought of that. I do think it has a brand problem. It's a recognizable brand, so there's something to that, and you don't want to throw that out.
But does it mean so many different things to different people?
That's right. It does mean so. In every the background here is that every different country has a different dispensation of liberalism. So if you're in Australia, it means kind of center right. If you're in the U.S., it's progressive. If you're in France, it means like you're a cold-hearted individualist. Like it just depends on geography, and so it does have not only a brand issue, a brand confusion. But it is such a storied and rich tradition that I feel the word is worth preserving. And the pitch of this book, look, at its most kind of ambitious, the pitch of this book is that, let's say we went back to the 19th century, and everyone here is a Christian. It would be as if we lost no one knew the word Christian or Christianity, but they lived a certain way. My claim in the book is that we all live a certain way, but we haven't yet put our right finger on the label that would name it. And that's, in my not-so-modest way here, is what I'm trying to do. I say we just don't have the label for the way that all of us kind of are. And I'm trying to furnish that with liberalism, with a tradition that's capacious enough yet deep enough to do that kind of work.
You identify, how central it is, to the core of how we live. And I think one of the things you call out is that it so surrounds us, we don't recognise it. Use the water metaphor. But are you concerned that the trend, I'm very interested, you say, look, it's a relatively recent phenomenon compared to so many of the others that we know, but are you worried that the tide is going out and that the students who start studying with you next year through their lifetime, what they fundamentally will see is a retreat of the centralism of liberalism? Or do you see it as enduring and renewing and sustaining despite the buffeting?
I think Australia is very lucky. I think we're the lucky country, but I think we're lucky because we have mandatory voting, and that keeps a certain centrism in the country, which will keep us in liberal waters for some time. And I think that institution is rare, and it is very, very valuable. So I would be worried about that kind of drift away from liberalism in other countries. In this one, I'm not going to proselytize in the PPE just because I don't really think I need to. I think that these students are going to live in a society that will remain liberal in a wide sense for some time.
So a question that's come through on Slido. I mean, at the beginning of your talk, you talked about, in a sense, the centrality of liberalism, the way we've often thought of the centrality of religious traditions. The question is, how does living a liberal way of life differ from, say, a religious way of life?
Yeah.
And is your view that spirituality or faith or liberal views are really actually quite aligned? Which is that?
So you could just just the last clause.
Or is your view that spirituality or faith or liberal views are really quite aligned?
No, I don't think that. Okay, the difficult question. Okay, so my next project is on this question exactly. So you've indulged me long enough, and I'll beg your patience a little bit more. For my next project, I want to call it something like, what do they want? And I want to look at illiberal countries. So I have in mind looking at China, India, Iran, Russia. And I want to work with insiders of those countries, people who believe in those worlds. And I want to ask them three things. First, what way of life do you really affirm? Second, why is that way of life awesome? Because I think there are real human goods at the heart of all of them. They're just different. And third, how does your state aggressively and actively promote that way of life? And I want to try to get an overview of the different kinds of, I want to call it soulcraft, that is happening around the world. And I don't think that they're reconcilable. I think there is genuine value pluralism. And I think, though, that to make sense of the condition that we're in right now, we need to understand these non-liberal alternatives, not as just kind of like kleptocrats or corrupt or just obsessed with money and power, but ideal-driven in very important respects. And that's what I want to try to figure out, how that sits together around the world.
Now, I've had a technical malfunction here, so we're going to trade up the technology. Thank you very much. Is capitalism an obstacle to liberalism?
Yes.
More detail, please.
Okay. No, okay, right. Okay, so yes, it is. All right. Was that, who asked that?
Anonymous.
Yeah. Next easy question. Okay, so capitalism is incredible at producing abundance, and I think that is true. I think it's incredible also at producing inequity and inequality. And so I think that liberalism emerges in so many respects to try to regulate, redistribute, and ensure a more fair system. So that's what I would argue. So liberalism was born in the early 19th century, but as the years went on, the decades went on, and unregulated capitalism just ran its machine, and it created its devastation. What was born out of result is socialism. And I think that any viable conception of liberalism has to incorporate core socialist. So I'm a social democrat. I'm a democratic socialist. I don't know where that puts me, but I'm a liberal, but on the left side. So I think that definitely the market needs to be tamed and redistributed and all that stuff.
Okay, so another word we hear quite a bit of these days. Where does liberalism meet libertarianism?
So libertarianism, okay. So I once had lunch with the main historian of liberalism, and he said something that stuck in my head. He said, look, it's such a plural tradition, Alex. I think of it as modular furniture. So, like you're sitting on modular furniture, you can move around. And he says that at different decades, a different kind of furniture goes in the center, and that becomes a different kind of liberalism. So libertarianism parks, like, I don't know, the couch of freedom right in the middle of the room, and all the other furniture arranges itself. Another version is going to put I'm running out of furniture, the Chesterfield of tolerance at the middle of it, and then we're going to have a kind of pluralistic vision. Alternatively, you could have a robust justice, equality-based vision. So I think that libertarianism is part of the liberal panoply. I just don't think it can realize its notion of fairness. That said, the early and great defenders of what we now call neoliberalism and libertarianism were animated by questions of fairness. When Hayek talks about market freedoms, what he's really concerned about is to avoid state or central planning, which would lead to all kinds of ineffective and unfair outcomes. And he thinks the market is going to be much fairer than anything that an official can devise. So libertarians think of themselves as also pro-fairness, which makes for a very complicated picture. But I think we need to start from their conception of their own philosophy to take it seriously.
There are a number of questions that have come through that are along the same lines, and I think it references something that you referenced. In religions, we can practice, we can have religious disciplines that help us gain insight and enlightenment and a pathway to truth. Are there disciplines that we should be practicing that will enhance the quality of our liberalism and the way we live our lives as liberals?
I do.
What do you do?
We could do one. Do we have time? I think we have time. So, it's not on that, but
no, I need your face. Thank you.
Good. So all great world religions are full of practices, right? Mm-hmm. And in my book, I call them spiritual exercises. And this goes way, way back to ancient philosophy. So ancient philosophy is a very interesting contrast. Modern philosophy today, nowadays, we tend to think of philosophy as a really abstract kind of thing. It's all about generating big theoretical systems, asking big questions like, what do we know? How can we know? What is the world like? And then from those big questions, we sort of derive a practical bit at the end that we tag on. So the second critique comes after the first critique, and so on and so forth. Now, that's fine. That's modern philosophy. But ancient philosophy is so different. Ancient philosophy is animated simply by a concern for people to live well. And to be a philosopher in the ancient world just meant that you had to love wisdom and commit to living a certain way and in certain guidance by wisdom. So you could be a philosopher in the robust sense and never publish a thing. You wouldn't meet the minimum performance standards at the University of Sydney, but you would be a full-throated philosopher in the ancient world because you practice these disciplines. And so one of my main thinkers is a French philosopher who kind of collated these together and gave us a rich panoply of what he calls spiritual exercises. Now, what I try to do in my book is I try to generate spiritual exercises for liberals, and I draw on John Rawls to do it, and I propose a whole set at the end of the book that we can talk about. We could do one. Do we want to do one?
Are we up for one?
Yeah,
yes, the room
right.
is up for one. Yep.
Okay. This one has, Rawls invents a million and one crazy concept. I work on French philosophy, and no French philosopher has ever invented as many crazy arcane terms as John Rawls. He just wins at that game. And so the one that I have in mind here is called the original position. Okay, close your eyes. Step one. Oh, no, find a comfy seat. Step one, done. Step two, close your eyes. Mark, you playing?
I'm in.
All right. Now, imagine that you're with a group of people. Picture 10 people in your head. And you've been given an assignment. Your assignment is to devise rules for your society. Very fundamental rules that will govern you. That's your job. That's the brief. So what are the basic moral principles that should govern your society? Now, here comes a crucial twist. Rawls says, imagine that you don't know anything about yourself. You don't know if you're a man or a woman. You don't know if you're black or if you're white. You don't know if you're religious or not. You don't know anything about your positionality. Now, Rawls says, try to come up with rules that would govern your society. What kind of rules would you choose? You don't know who you are. You have to come up with rules, and once you figure out the rules, you'll know who you are. That veil will be lifted. Mark, what'd you come up with?
Well, something about treat everyone fairly for who they are.
That's right. Why?
Because irrespective of who I am, people will treat me for who I am rather than who they might think I am.
That's a great liberal answer. That's perfect. So there's prudential reasons, right? On the one hand, if you don't know who you are and you just start to say, all rules will favor Alex in that society, and I lift up the veil and, oh no, I'm not Alex. That's a terrible move. So on the one hand, you would do it out of prudence. But on the other hand, you do it because you want to start to think about justice and the fundamental moral commitments outside of our positionality. You and I, we're white dudes, we're up here, and we are just a constellation of certain kind of positional accidents of who we are. And I think if we step back for a second, we really don't think that those should, in fundamental ways, skew how we think about justice. And so what Rawls asks us to do is to try to get a little bit of neutrality, a little bit of distance from all that, and think outside of our subjective kind of makeup in order to think about what your commitments might be. And that's a spiritual exercise. We just did one. And you can do it on the fly. Next time you're suffering in line at Kohl's and you're like, oh my God, this is a slow death. You can think to yourself, take a step back and just chill out. Stop asserting your inner Karen here that wants to jump to the front of the line all the time and just get some relief from that. And that is not just a good thing to do, it's a happy thing to do.
Now, your book and your appearances are having impact. And I love this question that's come through on Slido because it's someone who heard you speak on Radio National in March.
Wow.
And they've had a question since March, and now's the chance to ask it. I pricked my ears to a use of the phrase, a generosity of interpretation, during your Big Ideas talk on Radio National. And the context was John Stuart Mill's book on liberty. Yeah. Please elaborate on the phrase, a generosity of interpretation.
I think that's great. So at the heart of the liberal way of life, so I tried to spell it out here, are two commitments. One is to freedom, one is to generosity. Now, the most easy way we can think about generosity is give more money in some sense, pay more taxes, agree to more social provision. And I don't disagree, that's very important. But I think at the core of living a liberal way of life is what I want to call, or what this question calls, interpretive generosity, hermeneutical generosity, which is to try to confront other people in the fullest version of charity that you can. And I think that is fundamentally at the root of what it means to be a liberal individual, and to try to refrain or resist from judgment. You don't have to I'm not saying go make friends with your local white supremacist. I'm not saying that at all. I'm trying to say let's not pounce on each other in the first instance and forgive the brand mention. Let's try to disagree well. And I think that in a polarized world, that kind of ethical imperative isn't enough, but it's necessary.
Time for just one or two more questions, and then a chance to talk with Alex afterwards and possibly pick up a copy of the book as well. Is it possible to understand liberalism without democracy, or vice versa?
Yes. This is a very difficult question. So, like I said, liberalism and democracy are odd bedfellows. And it's definitely possible, I think, to imagine a democracy which is not liberal. I think populist and authoritarian democracies are illiberal, but I do think that they can be robustly democratic. They can be majority rule. So I think that in terms of, so the other part of the equation, I think that's pretty clear. You can have illiberal democracies, and we see a lot of those around the world today. Whether you can have undemocratic liberalisms is a trickier question. I could say Singapore, and that wouldn't be that inaccurate, but it's more difficult to come up with that. But the more general answer is that I think if you isolate these two components, neither of them can be true to themselves for very long. Democracy will kind of move and drift towards a populism, which we want to resist, and liberalism will move towards an elitism and an aristocratic dispensation, which I also think wouldn't jibe with a lot of what we say today. So I think they're conceptually possible, but I think that once you pry them apart, both become susceptible to their own worst impulses and will drift towards non-democracy on the one hand and illiberalism on the other.
Just going to squeeze in one or two more. There's a reference here, about possibly whether your book could be interpreted as a self-help book. If you're interested in friendships and personal relationships, good advice in this book for you?
Yeah, some of my best friends are liberals. No, okay, listen. Okay, if you want one take-home out of this thing is I really, really think that the idea of the caricature of liberalism as an individualistic, selfish kind of doctrine where I'm hustling for my own good, you're running your own game, I think that that is badly wrong. I think that if you put the idea of fairness at the heart of your worldview and the liberal worldview, that is relational by nature. And so I think that built into a concept of genuine liberalism is a certain generosity of relationship. And so in that sense, I don't know. Yeah, so yes, fully yes.
Yes, fully yes. So it's a good
Yes.
reason to buy the book. And finally, one last question. 17 reasons. Did you start looking for 17? Did you get to 17 and stop? Why 17?
So, 17. So I've been asked, okay, so I can give you the joke answer. I'm better than that. I'll do the real answer. So someone has asked me, you've asked me. Yeah, you. Luara, my dear friend and colleague in philosophy. She says, Alex, look, 17, fine. But why don't you actually just, we could really rationalize this list. We could make it more efficient. We could just say, what do you want? You want to say autonomy plus what? Sorry. Okay, sorry, all right. Luara on the spot, what do you? Yeah. Oh. Yeah, okay, so that's what she, so that was.
So you could have edited it back.
I could have.
Yeah.
But I would have been, yeah, right. You could have edited Dickens too, but why would you do that? You need to be fulsome. And the reason why is I don't want to just go with autonomy because I want to suggest how liberalism is such a adaptable, pliable virtue that it pops up in all our lives. So when we talking about autonomy or tolerance, we get in a very kind of like, I think, unimaginative headspace where we picture like citizens encountering citizens in the public sphere. And what I'm trying to say is that every time you laugh at a joke on YouTube, you're liberaling it up. And every time you raise your kid in a certain kind of way, nowadays you're liberaling it up. And so 17, because I want to show how diffuse these values are and how they've worked their way into every nook and cranny of who we are. So if I may, before another question, who here thinks they're liberal deep down? I want to go back to my question. I've lost people? Oh my God.
No.
This breaks my heart.
No, they're
Come
also
on.
absorbed.
Buy the book.
Fantastic. What a masterclass for all of us tonight, ladies and gentlemen. What a treat to hear Alex talk through his great new book, Liberalism as a Way of Life. Will you thank him very much for joining us this evening?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
And I'll be sitting down for a further deep conversation with Alex in the week ahead for the Solutionists podcast. So if you want to hear more of Alex talking about the ideas in his book, you can be able to tune into that wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're in with us tonight, Alex will be signing copies of his book up the back. Thanks very much for being with us this evening.